Talkspace can help with any specific challenges you might be facing, things like anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationship issues, and much more. At Talkspace.com, you can sign up online and get a personalized match with a provider that's right for you. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/scary to get $100 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/scary. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. Go to ZocDoc.com/something and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then start your search for a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/something. ZocDoc.com/something. Hello, I'm Blair Bathory, and this is my 50th episode as your humble narrator for the Something Scary podcast. I just want to say it's been my absolute pleasure to be with you every week, sharing scary stories from all over the world. Thank you so much for the warm welcome when I started. And thank you for joining me here, whether this is your first time or you're one of the brave souls who join me every single week. So without further ado, sweet screams, my spooky friends. So often, we zip around town, from home to school to extracurriculars. Some people are jet-setting from coast to coast or traveling the world. We're always so focused on getting to where we're going, we forgot about how we get there. But many terrifying events, accidents, and deaths occur during regular travel in trains, planes, and automobiles. That leaves a lot of places for unsettled ghosts and deadly spirits to reside. So be mindful on your travels that you don't run into the deadly paranormal or become one of them. First, a very bad influence, followed by a guilt trip of terror. Then, the road trip from hell. Finally, in our featured story, a living nightmare. Before we get to our stories, I just wanted to say that we would love to have you join our Patreon. We are primarily advertising dependent, but we would all like to be able to do fewer ads, and you can help make that possible by becoming a patron. Patrons get access to patrons-only Discord. Most of all, you will help us keep doing all the work that we do. Visit patreon.com/snarled. And don't forget to take a look at the awesome Something Scary merch at somethingscary@snarled.com. We've got something for everyone, from hoodies to hats to writer's notebooks. Get something to celebrate my 50th episode for all of you. Check it out after the podcast. So, want to hear something scary? Planes, trains, and deathmobiles. Sometimes, the punishment we most fear is a welcomed option after we learn the true horrors of our fate. Like in this story inspired by Naazneen. I was running down the steps to the platform with my friend Sutton to catch the last train that would take us back to our hometown. It was a Wednesday. We had been out in the city all day playing hooky from school. If I wasn't home by the time I usually returned from swim practice, my mom would know and she would kill me. We sprinted our hearts out, and we would have made it if Sutton hadn't insisted on stopping just before the train to buy a bottle of water. By the time Sutton got to the platform, the train had already left. We could see the headlights slowly fading away like a movie. I looked at Sutton. I was pissed. She awkwardly laughed and told me not to worry. Another train would come soon enough. I checked my phone for the schedule. The next train wouldn't arrive for 3 hours. 3 hours. It would be midnight by the time I got home, and my mom would be furious. I already lied to her just to go shopping in the city with Sutton. We've been best friends since elementary school and were inseparable, despite being very different. I never would have played hooky if she hadn't coaxed me into it. My mom used to joke that Sutton was going to get me killed. At that moment, I thought I might just kill her. If we got caught, if my mom found out. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a misty fog formed on the tracks. It seemed as though, while we were waiting, it had engulfed the entire station. I'd never seen anything like it. I looked over at Sutton. She was scrolling through her phone and giggling. How happy could she be at that moment? I snatched the phone from her. "What is this?" I asked, scanning the article that had amused her so much. Sutton explained it was just some dumb urban legend thing that our friend Jarrett sent to her. A viral post about the strange abduction and slaughtering of young adults and teens. Witnesses determined that the tragedies were happening because of the legend of the Tiki Tiki. The post went into detail about the Tiki Tiki, a Japanese urban legend involving the ghost of a schoolgirl who is said to have been tied by her bullies onto the railroad tracks, where her body was cut in half by a train. She is an onryo, or a vengeful spirit, who lurks in the urban areas and haunts train stations at night. Since she no longer has a lower body, she travels on either her hands or elbows, dragging her upper torso and making a scratching or a tiki-tiki-like sound. If she encounters an individual, she will chase them and slice them in half at the torso, mimicking her own murder and disfigurement. I wasn't superstitious, never believed in ghosts, but reading the horrific accounts of other girls that looked just like us really freaked me out. They bled to death from their torsos, for goodness sake. Standing there on that platform for 3 more hours, it started to scare the hell out of me. Not Sutton, though. She kept on giggling. "What the hell is so funny about this? It's actually terrifying," I asked, annoyed with her even more now I was late and scared. She waved me off and said Jarrett was just trying to mess with us. He was jealous that they skipped school and didn't invite him. I huffed and walked away from her, heading down the platform. I needed to figure out what excuse I was going to give my parents without her incessant giggling. That's when I heard Sutton making a noise, undoubtedly trying to cheer me up. "Grow up, Sutton," I shouted as I turned to look at her. But she was frozen. The look plastered across her face was one I'd never seen her before. It was fear. We both heard the low growl again. Then came the tiki-tiki. The sound rang through the station. We looked around for anyone else, but the place was empty. Everyone else had taken that last train, the one we missed. The strange sound was getting louder and creeping closer. We looked at each other, feeling helpless, not knowing what to do. Then good old Sutton burst out laughing, declaring it must be a stupid prank. Maybe Jarrett was there. Someone was clearly trying to mess with them. She took off in the direction of the noise without another thought. I watched Sutton disappear into the mist until I heard her screams. Saw splashes of red blood splatter come towards me. By the time I left and came back with help, the mist was gone, and there was a small crowd standing in a circle. They were hovering over the halved body of Sutton, my best friend. I thought my mom was going to kill me for what we had done, but she was so thankful that I was alive, that I wasn't brutally murdered too. They kept the killer unnamed in the paper, but I'll never forget that sound. It haunts me and always will. The sound of the tiki-tiki. Have you ever played hooky or skipped school? Were you caught? what were the repercussions of your actions? Sometimes I kick myself for waiting so long to find a mental health professional. After doing some research, I found an affordable and convenient option that worked with my unique lifestyle: Talkspace. At Talkspace.com, you can sign up online and get a personalized match with a provider that's right for you, typically within 48 hours. Talkspace can help with any specific challenges you might be facing. Therapists can be a guiding light and help provide coping tools for things like anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationship issues, and much more. And Talkspace is a fraction of the cost of in-person therapy. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $100 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/scary to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/scary to get $100 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/scary. When you are riddled with guilt, can you really have a good time? Or will that guilt come back to destroy you? Like in this story inspired by Naomi. Mallory was thrilled that their spring break trip to Spain had finally arrived just as planned. She remembered the day it'd first been set in stone. It was almost a year to the day. She and her friends had saved up money for the trip, and back then, the future was bright. Mallory didn't think anything could go wrong. It'd been several months, but Mallory still thought about that day all the time. How could she not? It was Stella who convinced Mallory to go ahead with the trip as planned. After all, it'd been a while since everything happened, and they'd already spent so much money. Why not make the most of it? Boarding the plane was stressful, but fun. In the end, it was all worth it, because the jet was everything they'd wanted. Luxurious, quiet, calming, and all to themselves. This was a 16-hour trip, so comfort was key. Still, rested against those plush pillows, gazing out at the ocean below, it all felt strange without a rumble coursed throughout the plane. Briefly, Mallory considered heading from the bed to the seats and belting up, but it was just turbulence. No reason to worry. Stella called for her. Mallory sat up, but stayed on the bed. Stella grinned, 2 glasses of wine in each hand. She handed one over to Mallory, then plopped down beside her. The whole trip felt weird. It was just her and Stella, after all. They were missing someone, but she was excited too. She and the girls had always wanted to go to Spain. Mallory looked back to Stella. "It's gonna be a good trip, Mal," Stella promised. They clinked their glasses together and made a toast to Tati. They were traveling in her honor, since she was no longer with them. They giggled and thought about how happy she would have been, and everything seemed all right, until the turbulence returned. The plane rumbled again, but this time it was more pronounced and violent. Mallory's head slammed back against the headboard, and Stella's wine splattered over her shirt. The lights flickered. Stella gasped. She set down the glass, smearing a hand across her ruined shirt. Unexpected turbulence, the pilot announced. Our apologies. We'll be at the destination soon. The lights flickered again. The plane kept rumbling. The girls steadied themselves, blinking up at the failing lights. In Mallory's past flights, the lights had never gone out because of turbulence. Her stomach churned. A sudden chill passed through her, then whirled around her figure, slithering down her spine. It almost felt like someone's touch. Then, things went south fast. The jet tilted. Objects clashed to the floors, glass shattered, and the girls went flying, slamming against the walls. Stella screeched, clutching onto Mallory. The lights went out fully, and Mallory scrambled around for Stella's arm. Her friend groaned, then stumbled to her feet, dragging Mallory up with her. The pilots remained quiet, judging by the way Stella huffed. She wanted to give them a piece of her mind, but she couldn't. They were locked off in the cockpit, quite literally flying the plane, doing a horrible job, but flying nonetheless. The window blinds slammed down, pitching them into total darkness.
Going without me.
Something whispered.
Moved on.
Okay, that wasn't turbulence. Another chill passed by. Mallory shivered and asked if Stella heard the voice. Stella's grip tightened as she hummed in response, too frightened to answer. Crackling filled the air, male voices coming from the speakers. The pilots were talking, but it was jumbled and glitchy. Then, nothing. Static. Mallory patted the wall beside her, then grabbed onto the window blind. She pulled. Still, it didn't budge. It trembled, but remained down, like something was pulling it back. All of a sudden, she heard a snarl from behind her. Fingers wrapped around her hair, ripping it back. She slammed against the seat's edge, and her vision went blurry. Stella screamed, but Mallory couldn't quite make out what was happening. Objects shattered. There were cries, shaking, rumbling, whirling, and the pilot's frightened yells. Then, through the blur, she saw it. An apparition. White mist curled around the figure. Short, dark hair, nimble fingers, buff shoulders, cold, black eyes. It looked just like Tati? The apparition dissipated. Another glass flew at Stella's face. She shrieked, then dodged. The glass shattered against the wall.
We're landing.
The pilot's staticky voice sounded over the speakers.
Just hang on.
The static crackled away, glitching into another voice. Tati's.
You went without me?
She roared.
You moved on?
Tati's garbled, demonic cries echoed across the plane. It shook, again and again. The girls were tossed about like rag dolls. Tati. Oh, Tati. Mallory knew they shouldn't have gone on this trip. Tati was meant to be there too, but had just passed away in a plane crash a few months ago. It had been a terrible, tragic accident, and Stella had hoped going to Spain would help them get over their grief. But what kind of friend was she to go on this trip after that?
Traitors!
Tati's voice shrieked. The static roared, the lights spasmed, her apparition brightened, eyes burning with rage, and she rushed forward, just as the plane slammed against the ground.
Get out!
The pilot screeched.
Get out now!
Stella kicked the emergency exit open. Sunlight blasted through. She grabbed Mallory's arm, scrambled, and yanked her out. The girls leapt off the jet. They crumpled to their knees, tears spilling from their cheeks. They cried. For Tati, for the trip, or for themselves. They didn't know. But in the end, at least they were safe. For now. Have you ever been inseparable with a group of friends? Did something terrible ever happen to all of you? Did it make you closer or drive you apart? On ZocDoc, you'll find quality doctors who focus on you, listen to you, and prioritize your care. That's really important to me personally, and ZocDoc is a great option for folks like me who are always on the go. On ZocDoc, you can see real, verified patient reviews to help find the right doctor in your network and in your neighborhood. With ZocDoc, you have a trusted guide to connect you to your favorite doctor you haven't met yet. Download the free mobile ZocDoc app today. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. Go to ZocDoc.com/something and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then start your search for a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/something. ZocDoc.com/something. Every country has its share of spooky tales and legends. The Australian outback has been the setting of many horror, both real and imagined. Like in this road trip story, inspired by actual events and written by Janine Pipe. I felt so carefree as I turned onto Wakehurst Parkway in New South Wales, Australia. I'd always wanted to travel after college and had already seen so many amazing places. I was heading back to the US in a few weeks to start my new job, but until then, the world was my oyster and I was having a blast. Being a young woman traveling solo can be daunting, but I'd met plenty of fellow backpackers along the way and was more than happy to give Flick a ride with me as we drove across the state territory. Our deal was simple. I drove and she read the guidebook out loud, and we pooled money for gas. We had spent a couple of days in Sydney and were now headed to see more of the coast. We'd left the city much later than we originally planned, and it was already dark. In fact, it was close to midnight. Luckily, Flick was using Google Maps and reading about the area on her cell. "Wow," she said, her finger scrolling through info on the screen. "This stretch of road is pretty famous." That piqued my interest. I'd been vlogging the trip as I went along, mainly for memories and my family, but some of the posts had done really well, especially about places with a cool backstory. "What for?" I asked, hoping the answer wasn't about kamikaze kangaroos. I reduced my speed a little just in case. "Murder," came the reply, and Flick filled me in on how we were not far from a grisly true crime scene. I shivered as she read about the victim having been dismembered and discovered in the killer's freezer. We were both quiet for a spell, thinking about the poor guy's family and vowing to call our own when it wasn't some ungodly hour stateside. We continued coasting down the road, surrounded by nothing but bushland. It really was pitch black outside. I was starting to feel a little nervous, the darkness and tales of murder having spooked me, so I asked Flick to check on her phone how much further we had left to travel. The stretch of road wasn't that long, but we seemed to have been on it for ages. Not much for, "Whoa, look out!" Something, a possum maybe, had run out in front of us. As I slammed on the brakes, something else happened, and the lights on the car, front and rear, all turned off simultaneously, as if I had cut the engine. We were plunged into total and utter darkness. I tried to flick the lights back on, but to no avail. I quickly put the car in park. I didn't want to stop on this deserted pitch-black road, but I also didn't want to carry on until I figured out what was up with the lights. I looked into the rearview mirror just for a second to check behind us and, "What the hell is the matter with you?" cried Flick, but I couldn't answer. Not yet. I had squeezed my eyes tightly shut, but now I opened them again and against my will forced myself to look in the rearview mirror again. She was still there. The girl in the back seat. Flick was still demanding to know what on earth had spooked me, and that was part of the problem. I didn't know. My voice wouldn't work, so I pointed at the mirror. I wasn't sure to be relieved that I wasn't crazy when I heard her gasp, or even more frightened if that was possible. "It's her," whispered Flick, still staring at our guest. She proved herself far braver than I by whipping her head around quickly and checking the back seat. "Yep, definitely her. We can only see her in the mirror." This nugget of information didn't quell any fear because it made absolutely no sense. The whole thing made no sense. How could we see the reflection of a very pale young woman with very dark hair and eyes wearing what looked like a white dress in the mirror if she wasn't there? I still couldn't speak, only emit a low whimper. Thankfully, Flick seemed to still have her wits about her and was now scrolling through her phone again. "Yes, I knew it. Okay, here we go. Get out, Kelly, get out!" No sooner had she spoken those words than the headlights and rear lights all came back on. I looked quickly in the mirror and only saw the back seat. I turned around quickly just to be sure, and the girl, whatever she was gone. I put my foot down and we sped out of there. Flick seemed to have the sense not to speak. She possibly saw my white knuckles, and it wasn't until we were out of the car and in bed at the campsite that she explained she'd seen the story quickly as she'd been looking at tourist information. No one knows for sure who Kelly is. Most believe she is the spirit of a murdered hitchhiker. she will appear in the mirror of cars traveling after midnight. And if you don't tell her that her presence is unwanted, then she will take control of the car and make you crash. Thank God, Flick knew what to do. If I had been driving on my own, well, I wouldn't be here to tell you my story. Have you ever experienced something like this while driving? Would you ever purposefully visit a notoriously haunted road at night? In our final story, join my co-host Stephanie as she tells the tale of a Japanese urban legend inspired by Gale and now animated over on our YouTube channel.
Sometimes what's more terrifying than our nightmares is the deadly anticipation of what will happen next. I stood alone on the dimly lit and deserted train platform. What a boring dream, I thought. As if in response, I heard an announcement. An emotionless voice said,
"The train will arrive shortly. If you get on board, you'll be greeted with a scary sight."
Shortly thereafter, the train arrived. Instead of resembling an average commuter train, it bore a strong likeness to those nostalgic rides found at the amusement parks. There were a number of pale, sickly-looking men and women sitting in the car windows. What a weird dream, I thought again. Even so, I was curious to test myself, see how badly my own dream could scare me. After all, I could always just wake up and I was in total control, right? I climbed aboard and settled into the third carriage from the rear. The air enveloped me with its mild and damp embrace. The experience felt so authentic that I nearly questioned whether I was still trapped within a dream. I jolted forward as the train began to move. My heart started to race with anticipation. Shortly after, we departed. We entered a tunnel that was illuminated with a purple light. I remember thinking that I'd been there before. It looked just like those ghost rides I'd ridden at theme parks when I was a kid. The dream stemmed from those distant memories, deeply embedded within my consciousness. Nothing scary at all. The announcer spoke again. "Next stop is Ikisukuri, Ikisukuri." Okay, that was odd. That's not a place, it's a Japanese dish. A piece of fish you eat while the thing is still alive. Suddenly, I hear an ear-piercing shriek from behind me. I turn around and I saw the man sitting in the very last seat, surrounded by little creatures with hunchbacks, dressed in rags, wearing monkey masks. Right before my eyes, they carved up the man's body, just like the fish dish. I could only watch in horror. No one tried to stop them. A horrendous stench engulfed me. The man kept screaming. I could barely look as one by one his organs were being pulled from his body and scattered everywhere. A pale woman sat one seat behind me, but in spite of the commotion, she quietly stared ahead and paid no attention. It was all so terrible and felt and smelled so real. Why wasn't I waking up? Why couldn't I wake myself up? Instead, the announcer spoke again. He said,
"Next stop, gouging out, next."
This time, two monkey mask-wearing creatures appeared with spoons. They began scooping out the eyes of the woman behind me. Until that moment, she had sat expressionless. But the pain was so great, her face morphed into a look of pure agony. She let out a screech that nearly ruptured my eardrums. Her eyeballs popped out of their sockets, and the smell of coppery blood was unbearable. "Wake up!" I couldn't take it anymore. If they're going in seat order, I'd be at the next stop. The announcer again, over unseen speakers. I held my breath.
"Next stop, minced meat, next."
I could easily imagine what would become of me. I gathered my nerves and concentrated on waking up. Come on, wake up, wake up! A monkey-masked monster inched towards me, close enough for me to hear the mechanical whir. Sound of the tool the creature would use to destroy me. I prayed for the Lord to let me wake up, and just as I felt the wind from the machine on my face, I knew I was going to die. I bolted upright, finally awake and out of that nightmare. My whole body was drenched in sweat, tears streaming from my eyes. I ran to the kitchen and drank several glasses of water, eventually calming down. The dream had been horrifyingly real. The next day at school, I told my friends all about it, but they just laughed it off. It was only a dream, they said. Dreams can't hurt you. 4 years passed. I was in college and had completely forgotten about the nightmare. It was very late and I was studying for finals when I leaned back in on my chair, my head nodding.
Next stop, gouging out.
The memories came flooding back. I was on the exact same train with the exact same passengers and creatures in monkey masks. I told myself to just wake up. It was clearly just a stress dream. Wake up, wake up, wake up! Suddenly, silence. I had escaped again. Then, just as I was about to open my eyes, I heard the announcer.
Running away again? Well played. Just know the next time you come here will be your last.
My head snapped up and I was back in my room and completely out of the nightmare. However, the sense of terror remained. The announcement I heard was not in my dreams. I heard that here, in reality. The final message from the announcer had reached me as I woke up. Since then, I haven't had the dream, but I've reassigned myself to the fact that the next time I do, I'll die of a heart attack or something in my sleep. In this world, it might seem like something medical, but in that world, I know my fate will be much worse. I'll be grounded into minced meat.
This week's podcast stories were edited by Sarah Lukasiewicz, Janine Pipe, and Stephanie Strange. Narration by Blair Bathory and Stephanie Strange. Audio edited and mixed by Calvin Linderman. Additional audio editing by Fitz Harris. Art and graphics by Irma Richardson. Produced by Anna Villalobos. Executive produced by Gail Gilman. Music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman.